Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night for absolutely no reason and just laid there wondering what is wrong with you before you keep scrolling? I need you to do something for me right now. Type in the comments below which topic you want me to cover next, because I read every single comment, and the next video on this channel is going to be picked from what you write down there. And while you are typing that out, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and tap the like button too, because it genuinely helps this channel more than you know, and it costs you nothing. But before we get into tonight's story, get comfortable, get into your bed, turn the lights down low, and just let your body sink into the mattress, because what I am about to tell you is going to change the way you think about something you do every single night of your life, and that is sleep. Because the truth is that the way you sleep right now, closing your eyes once and opening them 8 hours later in one long, uninterrupted stretch, is not the way humans slept for most of our history. In fact, for thousands of years before electricity existed, people did not sleep in one block at all. They slept in 2 separate sleeps with an hour, or 2 of quiet wakefulness in between, and this was not rare or unusual. It was completely normal. It was expected. It was written about in letters and court records and medical texts, and nobody thought anything strange about it at all. Historians call it segmented sleep or biphasic sleep, and once you understand how it worked, you will start to wonder if the exhausted, restless nights you have been having are not a modern problem at all, but your body quietly trying to return to something ancient that we forgot on purpose because of a single invention that changed everything. And that invention was artificial light. And tonight we are going deep into the strange, forgotten history of how people actually slept before the modern world rewired their bodies. And we are going to travel through candlelit medieval cottages and Roman villas and Egyptian temples and Victorian bedrooms and quiet monasteries. And we are going to sit with people from every single one of those eras as the sun goes down and their world goes dark. And we are going to watch what they did when the only light left was a single flame. Before we go further, picture a small village somewhere in medieval Europe. The sun has just gone down, and there is no glow from any window except the faint orange flicker of a single candle. A family of 5 or 6 people is crammed into one small room. The walls are thick, stone or packed earth. The roof is thatched with straw, and the fire in the hearth is the only source of warmth and light in the entire home. There is no such thing as a bedroom for each person. There's one shared bed, sometimes just a straw mattress laid on the floor, and everyone in the household sleeps together. Parents, children, grandparents, sometimes even the family dog curled up near the fire for warmth. And when the sun set, which in winter could be as early as 5 in the afternoon, there was simply nothing left to do. Candles were expensive. Oil for lamps was expensive, and most ordinary families could not justify burning fuel just to stay awake, doing nothing. So as soon as it got dark, people went to bed. Not because they were tired, but because there was nothing else to do. This is the first thing that is so different from our lives today. We treat bedtime as the end of a long day of activity. But for most of human history, bedtime was simply dictated by the sun going down, regardless of how tired a person actually felt. And this is where the segmented sleep pattern begins, because when you go to bed at 6 or 7 in the evening and your body is not actually exhausted yet, something interesting happens. You sleep for 3 or 4 hours very deeply, and then your body naturally wakes up around midnight, not because anything disturbed you, but simply because you have had enough of that first block of rest. And this waking period was called first sleep in Old English texts. It was referred to as first sleep and second sleep, with an interval in between called simply the watch or the watching hour. During this midnight waking period, people did not panic. They did not reach for their phones, because obviously phones did not exist. They did not lie there anxious about not being asleep, because this was completely expected and normal. Instead, this was often one of the most intimate and important parts of the entire day. Historians have found letters, diaries, and court testimonies from the medieval and early modern periods that describe this waking hour in incredible detail. Married couples would use this quiet time to talk about their days, their plans, their worries, their dreams from the first sleep they had just woken from. because dreams from the first sleep were believed to be especially significant and were often discussed and interpreted right there in the dark. Some couples use this time for intimacy. Physicians of the time actually recommended it as the ideal time for conception, believing that after a period of rest, the body was calmer and more suited for such things. Others used the watching hour for quiet prayer. Religious households would wake specifically to pray during this window, because it was believed that prayers offered in the deep stillness of the night carried special weight. Some people got up and did small chores, checking on animals, tending a fire that had burned low. Mending a torn piece of clothing by candlelight, visiting neighbors was not unheard of. Either there are records of people walking to a nearby house during this midnight window to share news, or simply keep each other company briefly before returning to bed for their second sleep, and then after an hour or sometimes two of this quiet, wakeful activity, the household would settle back down and drift into their second sleep, which would carry them through until dawn, when the sun rose and the entire cycle of daily life began again. What is remarkable is just how deeply embedded this pattern was in the language and literature of the time. You can find references to first sleep and second sleep scattered throughout historical writing in ways that assume the reader already understands exactly what is being talked about. There is no need to explain the concept, because everybody experienced it, the same way historians have traced references to this two-part sleep pattern back through centuries of European texts. Court depositions from criminal trials sometimes hinge on this detail, because a witness might testify that they saw something happen during their first sleep or right after waking for their second sleep, giving investigators a very specific window of time. Medical texts from physicians discussed which activities were best suited for the first sleep and which were better left for the second. Household guides advised women on managing tasks around these 2 blocks of rest. Even prayer manuals included specific prayers meant to be recited during the midnight waking period, showing just how ordinary and expected this pause in the night truly was. This was not some rare event experienced by a small number of unusual sleepers. This was the standard pattern of sleep for the vast majority of the population across an enormous stretch of history, and geography researchers who have studied this topic extensively point out that references to segmented sleep can be found not just in one country or one century, but across many different regions and time periods, suggesting that this was simply how the human body naturally organized its rest when left without artificial interference. So what changed, and why did this pattern completely vanish from human memory to the point where most people today have never even heard of it? The answer, according to historians, comes down almost entirely to the introduction and spread of artificial lighting in the centuries before street lighting, and reliable indoor lighting became widespread, and affordable darkness ruled the night completely. Once the sun went down, there was very little a person could safely or practically do. Candles were costly to produce and burned quickly. Oil lamps required fuel that many households could not spare, and open flames inside a home made of wood and thatch carried very real risks of fire. So for the overwhelming majority of people across history, nighttime after sunset meant an early bedtime, whether they felt tired or not. But as cities grew and as street lighting began to appear, first with oil lamps lining major roads and later with gas lighting illuminating entire districts, the night itself began to change. It was no longer simply dark and empty. It became a space where activity could continue. Taverns stayed open later, theaters scheduled evening performances, shops extended their hours, and people began staying up later and later into what had previously been considered the deep dead hours of night. And then in the late 1800s, the widespread adoption of electric lighting completed this transformation entirely. With a switch on a wall, a person could banish darkness instantly and completely. And once that happened, bedtimes across entire societies began shifting. Later and later, people were staying awake longer into the evening, doing work, socializing, reading, and simply extending the day artificially. And because people were now going to bed later while still needing to wake at a similar time for work, the next morning their sleep window shrank, and that shrinking window left no room for a natural midnight waking period. The body simply did not have the luxury of a long enough sleep opportunity to split itself into two separate rest cycles anymore. Instead, exhausted from a longer waking day and a shorter sleep window, the body adapted by consolidating rest into one single continuous block. And within just a couple of generations, the entire concept of first sleep and second sleep faded from common knowledge until it was almost completely forgotten by the general public, only surviving in old texts and the research of historians who went digging through centuries of documents to piece the pattern back together. There is a researcher named Roger E. Kirch who is often credited with bringing this entire forgotten history back into public awareness. He spent years combing through diaries, court records, medical texts, and literature from across Europe, searching for references to sleep patterns. And what he found was hundreds and hundreds of mentions of this two-part sleeping structure scattered across centuries of documents. He published his findings, and it sparked renewed interest in understanding what human sleep might have looked like before industrialization completely reshaped our daily schedules. And interestingly, there have been modern experiments designed to test whether the human body would naturally revert back to this segmented pattern if given the chance. In one well-known study, a group of participants were placed in an environment without any artificial light for extended stretches each day, essentially simulating the long, dark winter nights that would have been common in earlier centuries. And over time, something fascinating happened. The participants' sleep patterns began to shift. They started sleeping in two distinct blocks with a period of quiet wakefulness in between, almost identical to what historians had been reading about in centuries-old documents when the artificial light was removed and the days were allowed to follow something closer to a natural darkness cycle. The human body seemed to remember on its own how it used to rest. Now that we understand how people slept, let us step even further back in time and look at some of the strange rituals, customs, and beliefs that different cultures built around this idea of nighttime rest. Because sleep throughout history was never just a biological function. It was wrapped in superstition, religion, medicine, and social ritual in ways that might surprise you. Take ancient Egypt, for example, where wealthy individuals slept not on soft pillows but on hard, curved headrests, carved from wood or stone. These headrests were shaped to cradle the neck rather than the whole head. And while that might sound incredibly uncomfortable to us today, it actually served a practical purpose in the hot Egyptian climate. Keeping the head elevated helped with airflow and was believed to protect the sleeper from insects crawling across their face during the night. And these headrests were not purely practical objects. Either many were decorated with images of protective deities, because ancient Egyptians believed that sleep left a person vulnerable to evil spirits, and nightmares were often seen as attacks from malevolent forces that needed to be warded off, which is why some headrests were carved with the image of the god Bez, a squat, fierce-looking deity believed to protect people specifically during their most vulnerable hours in the darkness of night. Meanwhile, in ancient Rome, sleep customs looked completely different for the wealthy elite. A Roman noble might sleep in an elaborately decorated bedroom on a raised wooden bed frame, with a mattress stuffed with wool or feathers layered with fine linens. But even with all that luxury, Roman households were not always peaceful places to sleep, because Roman cities were incredibly loud. Even at night, the streets of Rome were filled with the sound of carts delivering goods, since daytime cart traffic was actually restricted by law in many areas, forcing deliveries to happen after dark, which meant that the clattering of wheels on stone streets, the shouting of drivers, and the general noise of urban life continued well into what should have been the quiet hours. Some wealthy Romans went to extreme lengths to escape. This noise, building estates far outside the city, or constructing thick-walled bedrooms specifically designed to block out sound. And interestingly, there are historical records suggesting that some wealthy Romans genuinely did sleep with a weapon nearby. Not necessarily out of paranoia, but because home security in a bustling ancient city was a real and constant concern. Break-ins were common enough that being prepared even while sleeping was simply considered practical. In medieval Europe, sleep was deeply intertwined with religious practice, particularly within monasteries where monks followed an incredibly strict schedule that completely embraced the idea of interrupted sleep, rather than fighting against it. Monks would go to bed shortly after sunset, just like the rest of the population, but then in the middle of the night, often around what we would now call 2 hour. 3 in the morning, they would rise for a service called matins, or sometimes called the night office. This was a formal prayer service conducted in the deep darkness of night by candlelight in a cold stone chapel. And after this service concluded, the monks would return to their beds for a second period of sleep before rising again at dawn for the day's first official prayers. This practice was not seen as a disruption to rest at all. It was considered spiritually significant. The middle of the night was viewed as a uniquely sacred time, a period when the world was silent and still, and prayers offered during those hours were believed to hold special meaning. This monastic practice actually mirrors the secular pattern of first sleep and second sleep almost perfectly, except instead of quiet conversation or chores, the waking hour was filled with structured religious devotion, showing just how universally this 2-part sleep structure had embedded itself into daily and spiritual life across medieval society. Now let us talk about something a little different, the strange and sometimes genuinely dangerous remedies people turn to when they simply could not sleep at all, because insomnia is not a modern invention. People throughout history struggled with sleeplessness just as much as we do today, and the solutions they came up with ranged from mildly odd to outright alarming in ancient times. Herbal remedies were the most common approach. Chamomile, valerian root, and lavender were widely used across many cultures. And interestingly, these same herbs are still recommended today for calming the nerves and easing a person into rest, showing that some traditional remedies genuinely had merit. But not all historical sleep remedies were so gentle during the Victorian era, for example, as industrialization pushed people into longer working hours and disrupted traditional sleep patterns. Insomnia became an increasingly common complaint among the general population, and physicians of the time sometimes prescribed treatments that would be considered deeply alarming by modern medical standards. Opium-based tinctures were commonly recommended for sleeplessness and were available without much restriction, allowing people to essentially medicate themselves into unconsciousness. Some Victorian doctors also prescribed alcohol-based tonics, specifically marketed for sleep problems, and worst of all, some of these products were even given to infants and young children who would not stop crying at night, creating serious and sometimes tragic consequences that were not well understood at the time. This era also saw the rise of stranging. Mechanical sleep aids and devices. Inventors created elaborate contraptions claiming to induce sleep through vibration, through specific head positioning, or through supposedly therapeutic electrical currents applied directly to the scalp. Most of these devices had no real scientific basis, but they sold well, simply because desperate sleepless people were willing to try almost anything. If we travel outside of Europe, the beliefs and practices around sleep become even more varied and fascinating. In parts of West Africa, there were, and in some communities still are, strong traditions around dream interpretation, with the belief that dreams experienced during sleep serve as a genuine channel of communication with ancestors and spirits, meaning that sleep was never viewed as simply passive rest, but as an active spiritual experience worthy of careful attention and interpretation. Each morning, in various Native American cultures, dream catchers originating specifically from Ojibwe tradition were created and hung above sleeping areas, particularly for children, based on the belief that they would filter out bad dreams while allowing good dreams to pass through to the sleeper. In traditional Japanese culture, there existed and still exists to some degree a cultural practice known as inamori, which refers to a kind of public sleeping while technically remaining present and engaged historically. This was viewed not as laziness, but in certain contexts almost as a subtle sign of dedication, showing that a person had worked themselves to the point of exhaustion, and this cultural attitude toward brief public Rest differs enormously from many Western cultures where falling asleep in a public or professional setting is generally viewed as embarrassing or unprofessional. In ancient China, sleep positions and directions were taken very seriously within traditional practices related to energy flow and the arrangement of the body and its surroundings. Certain sleeping directions were considered more auspicious then. Others, in the position of the bed within a room, was carefully considered as being connected to the sleeper's overall health and fortune. As we continue moving quietly through this history of sleep, it becomes clear that despite all of these differences across cultures and centuries, there is one thing that remained constant everywhere, and it is this: the night has always been treated by humans as something more than simply an absence of light. It has always carried, meaning it has always felt like a separate world from the busy daylight. Ours a world with its own rules, its own dangers, and its own quiet rituals, whether it was a Roman noble drifting off with a blade nearby, or a medieval peasant waking for a quiet hour of prayer, or an Egyptian resting their neck against a carved wooden headrest decorated with protective symbols, or a Victorian family reaching uncertainly for a bottle promising peaceful rest. Every single one of these people, across every era, shared the exact same basic experience that you are having right now. As you listen to this, the slow settling of the body, the gradual quieting of the mind, the soft surrender into darkness and stillness that comes at the end of every single day, regardless of century or culture or belief system. Let us slow down even further now and simply sit with the quiet details of an ordinary night in a medieval village, because there is something deeply calming about picturing this scene clearly. The fire in the hearth has burned down to a soft bed of glowing embers, casting a dim orange light across the packed earth floor. The family has finished their evening meal, which was simple bread, perhaps some pottage. A thick vegetable stew simmered slowly over the fire throughout the afternoon. The children are already drowsy from the day's work, helping with animals, gathering firewood, carrying water from a nearby well. The mother is finishing the last small task of the evening, mending a torn piece of cloth by the dim glow of the embers, her needle moving slowly, rhythmically, almost hypnotically in the low light. The father sits nearby, quietly checking that the door is properly secured for the night. The animals outside are settling as well, the soft shuffling of a cow in its enclosure, the occasional quiet clucking of chickens roosting for the night, and then one by one the family moves toward their shared sleeping area. The straw mattress is arranged, the thin woolen blankets are pulled close, and the room grows quiet, except for the gentle crackling of the dying fire and the soft, steady breathing of a household settling into rest. The candle, if there is one remaining lit, is finally extinguished with a soft breath, and the room falls into complete darkness, except for the faint orange glow of the embers. The only sounds now are the wind moving gently outside, the occasional distant call of a night bird, and the slow, steady breathing of a family drifting deeper and deeper into sleep hours. Pass quietly in this stillness. The fire continues to slowly die down, the embers shifting occasionally with a soft settling sound. The temperature in the room gradually cools, and outside the stars move slowly across the sky, marking the passage of the night without any clock or device needed to measure it at all. And then somewhere in the deep, quiet middle of the night, one by one, the family members begin to stir, not from any disturbance, but simply because their first sleep has come to its natural end. There is a soft rustling of blankets, a quiet exhale. Someone shifts position, someone else murmurs something too quiet to make out, and in the dim glow of the remaining embers, the room slowly returns to a very soft, very quiet kind of wakefulness. This is the watching hour, the quiet space between first sleep and second sleep. And in this particular household tonight, nothing dramatic happens. There is no urgent task, no pressing conversation, just the soft, quiet stillness of a family resting together in the dark. The mother perhaps reaches out instinctively to check that a child's blanket is still properly covering them. The father lies quietly listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around him somewhere outside. An owl calls softly into the night and is met with silence. The fire embers shift again, releasing one final small burst of orange light before settling back into their slow, steady glow. And gradually, without any effort or decision, the household begins to drift once more. The eyes grow heavy again. The breathing slows. The thoughts that were present during the watching hour begin to soften and fade. And one by one, the family sinks back down into their second sleep, the deeper, longer stretch of rest that will carry them all the way through until the first gray light of dawn begins to creep quietly through the small window of their home. And so the night continues in this slow, steady rhythm, the same rhythm that countless households experienced for thousands of years across countless generations, the same quiet cycle of settling, waking softly, and settling again, the same soft darkness, the same gentle stillness, the same slow passage of hours marked, not by any clock, but simply by the natural rising and falling of rest itself. And as we set, here now in the quiet of your own room tonight, listening to these old rhythms described slowly and softly, perhaps your own body is beginning to remember something ancient, something that lived in human bodies long before electricity, long before schedules, long before alarms and notifications and screens, something patient and slow and dark and calm. Let us continue drifting further into this quiet history, moving now toward the coast of ancient Scandinavia, where long winter nights stretched for many hours and households gathered close together around a central fire for warmth through the darkest months of the year. In these northern regions, where winter darkness could last far longer than daylight itself, households developed their own quiet rhythms. Around rest gathering close together on raised wooden platforms covered with furs and woolen blankets, sharing warmth and quiet conversation before eventually settling into sleep. The long, dark winters of this region meant that periods of wakefulness during the night were even more pronounced, with households sometimes remaining awake for extended periods during these long, dark stretches, engaged in quiet storytelling, passing down oral histories and legends from one generation to the next in the soft glow of a central fire before eventually settling back into rest as the night continued its slow, quiet passage. And if we travel further still to the villages of ancient India, we find sleep deeply connected once again to broader systems of belief about the body and its natural rhythms, with traditional practices emphasizing the importance of aligning rest with the natural cycle of the sun rising early before dawn was considered ideal, and going to sleep in the earlier hours of the evening was similarly encouraged, reflecting a broader cultural understanding that human rest should follow the quiet, natural rhythms of light and darkness rather than fighting against them. And throughout many of these traditions, there remained a consistent thread: the belief that the deep, quiet hours of night held a kind of stillness and clarity unavailable during the business of the daylight hours, a time meant for quiet reflection, for gentle rest, for the soft settling of both body and mind. As we continue moving slowly through these quiet historical scenes, let us return once more to a simple medieval household, settling in for the night the fire has burned low again. Just as it does every single night, the family has once again finished their evening meal and moved slowly toward their shared sleeping area. The same soft rustling of blankets, the same quiet settling of bodies into rest, same slow fading of conversation into silence, and the same gentle drift into that first deep block of sleep, and hours later the same soft natural waking in the deep quiet middle of the night, the same gentle stirring, the same soft exchange of quiet words, or perhaps simply silence and stillness shared together in the dark, and then once again the same slow gentle drift back into rest, carrying the household through the remaining hours of night until dawn. Night after night, Century after century, this same quiet rhythm repeated itself across countless households and countless villages across an enormous stretch of human history. The same soft settling, the same quiet waking, the same gentle drifting back into rest, a slow, steady rhythm that continued largely unchanged for thousands and thousands of years until the introduction of artificial light slowly and quietly began to reshape it. And even now, even after all of that change, even after electricity and schedules and modern life completely transformed the way we experience night and rest, there remains something deeply familiar about this old rhythm, something your own body may still quietly remember on some level buried beneath centuries of change. So as you lie here now, in the quiet darkness of your own room, listening to these old rhythms described slowly and softly, let your body settle just as those countless generations before you settled. Let your breathing slow, just as theirs did. Let your thoughts soften and fade, just as theirs did night after night for thousands of years, and let yourself drift slowly and gently down into rest, carried along by this same old quiet rhythm that has existed for as long as humans have closed their eyes at the end of a long day and allowed the darkness to carry them softly toward sleep. The fire continues to glow softly in the quiet dark. The wind continues to move gently. Outside, the stars continue their slow, quiet passage across the sky, and somewhere in the deep stillness of the night, countless generations before you settled into this exact same quiet rhythm, this exact same soft darkness, this exact same gentle drift toward rest. And now it is your turn to let go slowly and softly too. Release the day behind you and to sink quietly down into the same old rhythm that has carried humans gently into sleep for as long as the night itself has existed. Let us now drift even further back and sit for a while with the sleeping customs of ancient Mesopotamia, the very first cities where writing itself was invented. Because even here, among the earliest clay tablets ever pressed by human hands, there are references to dreams and sleep and the quiet fears that came with the darkness. The Sumerians and later the Babylonians believed that dreams were messages sent directly from the gods, and that the hours of sleep were a kind of doorway between the world of the living and the world of the divine. Temples employed dream interpreters whose entire profession was built around listening carefully to what a person experienced during the night and translating it into guidance for the following day. And just like in Egypt, there was a real and widespread fear of night. Demons believed to prowl the darkness, searching for sleepers to torment small clay figures, and protective charms have been found buried beneath the thresholds of ancient homes placed there, specifically to guard the household while its members lay vulnerable and unconscious through the long hours of night. And picture for a moment a family in one of these earliest cities, their home built from sun-dried. Mud brick the streets outside, narrow and quiet. Once the sun has gone down, the glow of a small oil lamp flickering gently against a plastered wall, and the soft murmur of a parent reciting a short protective phrase over a sleeping child before finally settling down themselves into the stillness of the night. Now let us move to the vast steppes of ancient Mongolia, where nomadic herding families lived inside round, felt covered tents called gurs, and slept together around a central fire that was carefully tended throughout the night to provide both warmth and a small, comforting source of light. The felt walls of the gur did an extraordinary job of blocking the harsh wind outside while the family slept arranged in a careful pattern around the fire, with the most respected elders positioned in the space, considered most honored, and children tucked warmly near their parents. And throughout the long, cold nights of the steppe, someone in the household would often wake periodically, simply to feed the fire a few more pieces of dried dung or wood, keeping the flame alive so that it would not die out completely before morning. And this simple, quiet task of tending the fire in the middle of the night was itself a kind of gentle nighttime ritual repeated household after household, night after night across the wide open grasslands stretching endlessly beneath a sky full of stars. Let us also sit for a while with the sleeping customs of the ancient Inuit peoples of the far north, where entire months of the year could pass with the sun barely rising above the horizon at all. In these communities, homes were often built partially underground or constructed from carefully stacked snow blocks, forming a shape that trapped body heat efficiently, and families slept together on raised platforms. Lined with thick furs, the darkness of the long polar night meant that the usual rhythm of waking with sunrise and sleeping with sunset simply did not apply in the same way it did elsewhere, and communities instead relied on other cues to structure their rest: the completion of a task, the settling of the fire, the quiet agreement among the household that it was time to rest, and in these long, dark winters. Storytelling once again played an enormous role, with elders sharing long, detailed oral histories during the quiet hours, stretching what might have been considered evening in other parts of the world into something closer to a long, slow, unhurried stretch of shared darkness and rest. Think now also of ancient Aboriginal Australian communities, where sleep and dreaming were understood through an entirely different framework built around what is often translated into English as the dreaming or the drem time, a deep and complex spiritual concept describing the foundational period in which the world itself was shaped and the ongoing spiritual reality that continues to exist alongside. The physical world's sleep in this context was never viewed as simply a biological necessity, but as a genuine point of connection to this deeper spiritual reality, with certain dreams carrying significant meaning for the community as a whole, and being shared and discussed carefully upon waking families would often sleep outdoors or in simple shelters, depending on the season and region gathered closely. Together with a small fire providing warmth through the cooler nights, the vast open sky stretching endlessly overhead, filled with more visible stars than most people today will ever witness in their entire lives. Let us slow down again now and return to a quiet European household this time. Not medieval, but somewhat later during the early modern period. Perhaps a small farmhouse in the countryside of 17th century England. The family has just finished a simple supper eaten together at a rough wooden table, the youngest children already rubbing their eyes with tiredness, the older children helping to clear the table and bank the fire for the night. The mother checks that the door is properly latched and that the small window shutters are secure against the cool night air. The father perhaps says a short evening prayer aloud with the family gathered quietly around him before everyone moves toward the shared sleeping loft above the main room, climbing a simple wooden ladder to reach the space where several straw-filled mattresses have been arranged close together for warmth, and one by one, the candle is extinguished. The room falls into darkness, and the soft, steady sound of breathing slowly fills the quiet space. Hours pass in this stillness. The fire below continues to slowly burn down the embers, shifting occasionally with a soft settling sound. And then, just as in countless households before this one across countless centuries, the family begins to stir softly in the deep, quiet middle of the night. Not from any disturbance, but simply because their bodies have completed the first natural block of rest there is. A soft rustling in the straw, someone shifts position, someone murmurs something quiet and unclear, and in the dim orange glow rising faintly from the embers below the loft, slowly settles into that familiar quiet wakefulness, the watching hour once again. And tonight, perhaps the mother uses this quiet time to softly hum an old tune half remembered from her own childhood, the sound barely audible, barely more. Then a breath, and gradually, one by one, the family drifts back down into sleep, carried along by the same slow, familiar rhythm that has repeated itself night after night for as long as anyone in the household can remember. Let us also spend a while longer with the strange remedies people turn to across history, when sleep simply refused to come, because beyond the opium tinctures and alcohol-based tonics of the Victorian era, There were countless other approaches tried across different centuries and cultures, and ancient Greece physicians associated with the healing god Asclepius practiced something called temple sleep, or incubation, where a person suffering from illness or sleeplessness would travel to a temple and sleep within its sacred halls, specifically hoping to receive a healing vision or dream sent directly from the god himself. Priests would guide the patient through purification rituals before they lay down to rest, surrounded by carved images of the healing serpent associated with Asclepius, and in the morning, the patient's dreams would be carefully recorded and interpreted as guidance for their treatment. And remarkably, these temple sleep practices are sometimes cited by historians as an extremely early precursor to modern practices of therapeutic rest and even early forms of psychological healing through dream interpretation. In medieval Europe, beyond simple herbal remedies, there was also a strong belief in the power of specific prayers and charms recited before bed to ward off nightmares and ensure peaceful rest. Small prayer books from the period sometimes included specific verses meant to be spoken quietly while lying in bed, and some households kept small protective objects near their sleeping area, a blessed piece of cloth, a small carved cross, a sprig of a particular herb believed to have protective qualities against bad dreams. And the nightmare itself was often personified in medieval folklore, not simply as a bad dream, but as an actual malevolent spirit or creature that would sit upon a sleeper's chest during the night, causing feelings of pressure and suffocation, which we now understand through modern science as a condition called sleep paralysis, but which for centuries was explained through folklore involving witches, spirits, or demonic visitors. Let us now slow the pace even further, because there is still so much more of this quiet history to sit with together. Think again of that same simple candlelit room, the fire glowing low, the family settled into their shared bed, the soft, steady rhythm of breathing, filling the stillness night after night after night, the pattern repeating itself with almost no variation at all across an enormous unbroken stretch of human history. The same fire, the same darkness, the same quiet settling, the same soft waking in the deep middle hours, the same gentle drift back down into rest, carrying each household through until the first pale light of dawn begins to creep quietly across the horizon. And this same quiet, unbroken rhythm continued largely unchanged generation after generation, century after century, through wars, through plagues, through the rise and fall of entire kingdoms and empires, while ordinary households simply continued this same slow, quiet, nightly ritual, completely unaware that centuries later someone would sit quietly describing it to you in the dark as you drift slowly toward sleep yourself. Think of the fire again, slowly burning down. Think of the soft orange glow fading gradually into darkness. Think of the quiet stillness settling over the room. Think of the slow, steady rhythm of breathing, filling the silence. Think of the gentle passage of hours marked only by the slow turning of stars overhead. Think of countless households across countless centuries settling into this exact same quiet. Rhythm night after night after night, the fire glowing softly, the darkness settling gently, the breathing slowing steadily, the thoughts softening and fading, the body sinking slowly and completely into rest, carried along by this same old rhythm that has existed for as long as humans have closed their eyes at the end of a long day and allowed the quiet darkness to carry them gently toward sleep. Let us now turn our attention to the quiet sleeping customs of ancient China, where for thousands of years the arrangement of a bed within a room was never treated as a casual decision, but as something deeply tied to the surrounding environment and to the flow of energy believed to move through every space. A person occupied the direction, a bed faced the placement of doors and windows relative to where a person's head would rest, and even the type of wood used to construct the bed frame were all considered carefully by households who wanted to ensure a peaceful night of rest, and physicians practicing traditional medicine in ancient China often linked disturbed sleep not simply to worry or noise, but to imbalances within the body itself, recommending herbal preparations, warm foods eaten earlier in the evening, and calming teas brewed from chrysanthemum or jujube seed, believed to gently ease a restless mind towards stillness and picture. Now a modest household in an ancient Chinese village. The evening meal finished, the wooden shutters drawn closed against the cool night air, a small oil lamp casting a soft, warm light across a simple wooden bed frame, and as the lamp is finally extinguished, the room settles into a deep and complete darkness broken only by the occasional distant sound of a dog somewhere in the village or the soft rustle of wind moving through nearby bamboo. Let us also spend some time with the quiet sleeping customs found across various regions of ancient Persia, where households often arranged their sleeping areas around a central courtyard open to the sky, allowing cool night air to settle gently over the home after the intense heat of the day had finally faded. During the hottest months of the year, many families would sleep on raised platforms constructed on the flat rooftops of their homes, seeking out whatever breeze could be found high above the narrow streets below and lying beneath an enormous open sky filled with countless visible stars. A family might drift off to sleep together on these rooftop platforms, the soft murmur of the city slowly quieting beneath them, the warmth of the day gradually releasing from the stone and clay structures surrounding them. And this practice of sleeping outdoors or on open rooftops during hot weather can actually be found across many different cultures throughout history, from the Mediterranean world through the Middle East and into parts of South Asia, wherever the heat of summer made sleeping indoors within closed walls simply too uncomfortable to bear. Now let us return once more to medieval Europe and sit for a while longer with the quiet details of a household we have not yet visited this time. Perhaps a small household belonging to a craftsman living within the walls of a medieval town rather than out in the countryside. Picture a narrow timber-framed house squeezed tightly between similar buildings along a quiet cobblestone street, the workshop, occupying the ground floor, tools and materials neatly put away for the night, and the family's living and sleeping space located just above, reached by a narrow, steep staircase. And as evening settles over the town, the craftsman and his family gather near a small hearth for their evening meal. The conversation quiet and unhurried after a long day of work, and once the meal is finished and the dishes are cleared, the family moves toward their shared sleeping area, a simple wooden bed frame for the parents and a smaller pallet on the floor nearby for the children. And just as in countless other households across the medieval world, the candle is eventually extinguished, the room falls into darkness, and the family drifts slowly into their first sleep of the night. Outside the narrow window, the sounds of the town continue for a while, longer the distant call of a night watchman making his rounds through the quiet streets, calling out the hour and confirming that all is well within the town walls, a duty that existed in many medieval towns, specifically to provide reassurance to sleeping households that someone remained alert and watchful through the night on their behalf. And gradually even these sounds fade, as the town itself settles more fully into the deep stillness of night. And hours later, in the deep, quiet middle hours, the craftsman's household stirs softly, just as households have stirred throughout this entire history we have been exploring together tonight. A natural, gentle waking following the completion of their first block of rest. And in the darkness, the craftsman might lie quietly listening to the distant call of the night watchman marking the passing hour before the household gradually drifts back down into their second sleep, carrying them through until the pale gray light of dawn begins to creep through the narrow window once more. Let us slow down further now and sit for a long while with the quiet imagery of candlelight itself, because there is something deeply calming about picturing the soft, warm glow of a single candle flame flickering gently in an otherwise completely dark room, the way the small flame dances slightly with the movement of air, the way the warm orange light spreads softly across nearby surfaces, fading gradually into shadow, the way the flame casts long, soft, moving shadows across the walls of a room, and the way that for thousands of years across countless different cultures and centuries, This same small, warm, flickering light was often the very last thing a person saw each night before closing their eyes and allowing the darkness to settle completely around them. Think of that same small flame now slowly flickering. Lower and lower the wick, gradually burning down the light, growing softer and dimmer until finally, with one last small flicker, the flame extinguishes completely and the room falls into a deep, complete, and peaceful darkness. Think again of the fire slowly dying down in a quiet hearth somewhere in medieval Europe, the embers glowing softly, orange gradually fading to a duller, deeper red as the night continues its slow, quiet passage. Think of the gentle stillness settling completely over a small household, the soft, steady sound of breathing, filling the quiet darkness, the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of a family resting together. After a long day, think of the stars slowly turning overhead, marking the passage of hours without any clock needed at all. Think of the same quiet rhythm repeating itself night after night after night, household after household, century after century, across an almost unimaginably long stretch of human history. The same darkness, the same stillness, the same slow settling into rest. Let us think once more of the ancient headrests of Egypt, carved carefully from smooth wood, polished until it gleamed softly in lamplight, decorated with small protective symbols meant to guard a sleeper through the vulnerable hours of night. Think of the quiet stone chapels of medieval monasteries where monks rose softly in the deep darkness of night to offer quiet prayers before returning once more. To rest, think of the felt-covered tents of the Mongolian steppe, where a small fire was carefully tended through the long, cold hours of night. Think of the raised platforms of ancient Persian rooftops, where families slept beneath an enormous open sky filled with countless stars. Think of all of these quiet scenes existing together across the long, slow arc of human history, each one following its own version of the exact same basic rhythm, the same slow settling into darkness, the same quiet stillness, the same gentle drift toward rest. And now let us slow down even further, because there is nothing left to rush toward here, nothing left to explain in detail, nothing left but the same soft, quiet imagery, repeating gently again and again. Think of the candle flame slowly flickering lower. Think of the fire slowly burning down to embers. Think of the darkness settling softly and completely over a quiet room. Think of the slow, steady rhythm of breathing filling the stillness. Think of the stars turning slowly overhead, marking the quiet passage of hours. Think of countless households across countless centuries settling into this same slow rhythm, night after night, the same darkness, the same stillness, the same quiet, gentle drift toward rest. Think of the fire again, slowly dying down, the embers glowing softer and softer. Think of the room growing quieter and quieter, the darkness settling more and more completely. Think of the breathing slowing further and further, the thoughts softening and fading more and more completely. Think of the body sinking deeper and deeper into stillness, carried along gently by this same old slow rhythm that has existed for as long as humans have closed their eyes at the end of a long day and allowed the quiet darkness to carry them softly and completely toward rest. Think of the candle flame one final time, flickering softly lower and lower until at last it fades completely into darkness. Think of the fire settling into its final quiet glow, the last embers slowly cooling in the stillness of the night. Think of the room now completely dark and completely quiet, the household resting peacefully together, just as countless households have rested together throughout this entire long, quiet history we have shared tonight. Think of the stars continuing their slow, silent passage overhead, marking hours that no longer need to be counted. Think of the darkness itself, soft and complete and gentle, wrapping quietly around everything, settling more and more deeply with each passing moment. Let us now travel to the medieval Islamic world during a period often remembered for enormous advances in medicine, astronomy, and scholarship, where physicians wrote extensively about the nature of sleep, treating it not as a mysterious or purely spiritual event, but as a subject worthy of careful medical study. Scholars of this era studied the causes of insomnia, the effects of diet on rest, and the relationship between sleep and overall health, producing detailed medical texts that would later influence physicians across Europe for centuries. Picture a household in a city such as Baghdad or Cordoba. During this period, the call to the final evening prayer echoing softly across rooftops as the sky deepens into darkness. A family gathering afterward to share a simple meal by the light of an oil lamp before settling onto cushions and woven mats arranged along the floor of their home. The scent of extinguished lamp oil lingering faintly in the air as darkness completely fills the room and the household drifts slowly into rest, surrounded by the quiet sounds of a city gradually settling for the night. Let us also picture the Viking longhouses of early medieval Scandinavia. Enormous timber structures shared by extended families, along with their livestock housed together under one long roof for warmth. Through brutally cold winters, a central fire running down the length of the building, providing both light and heat with raised wooden platforms lining the walls where family members would sleep together, wrapped in thick furs and woolen blankets. And throughout the long, dark winter nights of this region, someone would periodically rise to check the fire, adding fuel as needed to keep it burning steadily through the night, while outside the wind howled across frozen fields and the sound of livestock shifting quietly in their stalls blended with the soft breathing of a resting household, filling the enormous, shared space with a comforting sense of collective warmth and safety. Now let us think about the Aztec and Maya civilizations of ancient Mesoamerica, where households typically slept on simple woven mats called petates, laid directly on the floor of homes constructed from adobe or woven materials depending on the region and climate. And just as we have seen in so many other cultures across this long history, dreams held tremendous significance, being carefully recorded and interpreted often by specialized individuals within the community whose role was specifically to help interpret what a dream might mean for the dreamer or for the community as a whole. And picture a household in an ancient Mesoamerican village, the evening meal of maize and beans finished, the small hearth fire slowly dying down, and the family settling onto their woven mats as darkness completely fills their simple home, the sounds of the surrounding jungle or countryside gradually becoming the only sound remaining as the household drifts into sleep. Let us return once more to Europe now, but to a very different and far more difficult period, the era of recurring plague outbreaks that swept across the continent multiple times throughout the medieval and early modern periods. Because even something as basic and universal as sleep was deeply affected by the fear and uncertainty of these times. Historical records from plague years describe households too frightened to sleep, deeply at all fearful of symptoms appearing suddenly in the night, fearful of losing a family member silently while everyone else in the shared sleeping space remained unaware. And physicians of the period sometimes recommended specific practices meant to protect against the plague while sleeping, including burning particular herbs believed to purify the air of a sleeping chamber, or sleeping with small pouches of aromatic substances tied near the bed believed to ward off the mysterious disease. And picture the heavy, uneasy quiet of a household during one of these plague years. Windows sealed more tightly than usual, small fires kept burning specifically for their believed purifying smoke, and a family lying close together in the darkness, listening carefully to each other's breathing throughout the night in a way that would have been unnecessary during more ordinary times. Let us now spend more time with the Industrial Revolution and the enormous disruption it caused to sleep patterns across entire populations, because as factories began operating around the clock and as workers were required to report for extremely early shifts, sometimes beginning before dawn and continuing for 12 or more hours at a stretch, the traditional rhythms of rural life that had shaped human. Sleep for thousands of years were suddenly and dramatically broken apart. Entire families, including young children, were often required to work these long, exhausting factory shifts, leaving very little time for adequate rest, and the quiet, unhurried rhythm of first sleep and second sleep that had defined human rest for so long simply had no place within this new, demanding industrial schedule workers needed to sleep as efficiently as possible within whatever narrow window of time remained available to them. And this pressure to consolidate rest into a single efficient block, rather than a leisurely two-part rhythm, played a significant role in finally erasing the segmented sleep pattern from common practice across the rapidly industrializing world. And it was during this same industrial period that we see the explosion of strange commercial sleep remedies and devices we touched on earlier, because a population suddenly suffering from widespread chronic exhaustion created an enormous market for anything promising. Relief newspapers of the era were filled with advertisements for sleeping tonics, powders, and elaborate mechanical devices. Some companies sold small pillows, supposedly infused with calming herbs. Others sold elaborate metal frames designed to be worn on the head throughout the night, claiming to align the mind and body for deeper rest. And still others sold nothing more than sugar water and alcohol dressed up in fancy bottles with elaborate claims about restoring natural sleep. And because medical regulation during this period was extremely limited compared to today, many of these products were sold with almost no oversight at all, allowing manufacturers to make bold, unverified claims directly to an exhausted and desperate public. Let us also return once more to the detailed historical research that first brought the story of segmented sleep back into public awareness. Because the depth of evidence uncovered by historians studying old court records, diaries, and literature is genuinely remarkable. One frequently cited example comes from Old English legal records, where witnesses in criminal cases would testify using extremely specific language describing events as happening during their first sleep or shortly after they had woken, for what they called their second sleep language, used so casually and without any explanation at all that it clearly reflects an assumption shared by everyone present in the courtroom, that this two-part sleep pattern was simply common knowledge, requiring no further clarification. Similar casual references appear scattered throughout old medical texts, household advice manuals, and even personal letters exchanged between family members separated by distance, further reinforcing just how deeply this rhythm was woven into the ordinary fabric of daily life across an enormous stretch of history. Let us now sit for a while longer with some of the smaller, quieter superstitions that developed around sleep across various European traditions. Because beyond the larger cultural practices we have already explored, there existed countless small household customs, specifically meant to protect a sleeping family through the night. Some households placed a small piece of iron beneath a child's pillow, believing it would ward off malevolent spirits during the vulnerable hours of sleep. Others sprinkled a small amount of salt near the threshold of a sleeping chamber, believing it created a protective barrier that evil could not cross. Certain regions held to the belief that mirrors within a sleeping chamber should be covered or turned toward the wall during the night out of concern that a sleeping person's spirit might become trapped within the reflective surface while their body rested. And countless small prayers, charms, and rituals like these existed in enormous variety across different regions and time periods, each one reflecting the same underlying universal feeling that sleep left a person deeply vulnerable, and that some form of quiet protective ritual was needed to ensure a peaceful and safe path